when you're applying to rabbinical school, which I'm probably the only person here who's ever done. When you're applying to rabbinical school, one of the things they ask you to write a bunch of essays, and one of them is to write about a Torah portion, something brief, but a Torah portion that's meaningful to you. And you're also asked to do the same exercise prior to being ordained as a rabbi. And in the program for ordination, they publish that. And I chose for both of those. Most people don't pick the same one, but I chose for both of those on the way in and on the way out to pick this week's Torah portion, Vayishlach, which is sort of the continuation of the Jacob story, the Jacob narrative that we began a few weeks ago. And so I thought, well, I'll kind of give a overarching sort of narrative of it. And then, as most of you know, I generally like to do, I brought some fun texts. I think they're fun for us to look at and kind of explore together some deeper thoughts and ideas and meanings in this, right? But so Jacob, Torah portion begins, Jacob has fled his home because he is obviously understandably still concerned that Esau, has threatened to kill him after the whole birthright blessing, stealing, deception debacle. So Jacob flees and he camps for the night. He goes to sleep on a rock. Can't imagine that's the most comfortable pillow ever, but he goes to sleep on a rock. And two things happen while he's sleeping. One is that he wrestles, we're told, with, it's unclear, maybe God, maybe a man, according to the Hebrew, maybe an angel. It's unclear, but wrestles with someone, something. And we're going to go much deeper into that a little bit later with some of the texts. But he wrestles, and then he also has a dream. And in his dream, there's a ladder that is ascending to the heavens. And on that ladder, in his dream, there are angels going up and going down on this ladder. The term Jacob's ladder, right, comes from this dream. And two kind of, I think, interesting pieces of that kind of experience, particularly of his dream. One that I wrote about in actually both of those rabbinical school essays. The other that some of you probably heard me speak about on other occasions. The first is that the Torah says that the angels are going up and down, which if we actually take a moment to think about, one might assume is backwards, right? Douglas is nodding, right? Because many of us, I think, and we could have a whole other conversation about angels and Judaism, and a lot of folks, I think, don't think that angels are a part of Judaism. That's absolutely not true, right? Angels are all over the place, particularly in the Torah, right? It's an angel that comes and intervenes when Abraham's about to sacrifice Isaac. Right? Angels clearly in this Jacob story. But the angels going up and down seems backwards, because the angels theoretically, are in the lofty heavens with God and whatever else, right? And should be coming down to earth to do whatever and then returning to the heavens. But the idea that the angels are going up and down presumes that the angels are here already. It presumes the angels are here already. And so the game that Rabbi Leader loves to play, and I like to play sometimes too, is, okay, so what's the sermon in that? Right? What's the sermon? The sermon that I think is in that I've given several times, that I think some of us have probably heard me give several times, is that then obviously means that the angels are among us. And I don't mean necessarily angels with, halos and wings and whatever, that, all of us, we each have that opportunity, that potential to behave in an angelic way. When we reach out to someone in need, when we hold someone's hand, when we check on someone, when we are being the best versions of ourselves that helps to bring more warmth and light and goodness into the world, right? So that's one piece of the Jacob dream that my observation, I think, is interesting. The second is what Jacob says when he wakes up from this dream. He wakes up from this dream and he says, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh ve'anochi lo yadati. Surely God was in this place and I didn't know. I had no idea. Which that's the piece that I chose to, as I said before, write a couple essays on in rabbinical school, because this idea of God, or if we take it one step removed from whatever theological issues many of us probably have, the idea that there's something more, something holy, something sacred and special in what seems like the most ordinary moment is, in my opinion, the very essence of Judaism. If you ask me to sum up, Judaism in one sentence, I would tell you Judaism is about transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary, about taking the most mundane, quotidian moments of life, of the day, and elevating them into something more. That's why, a traditional Jew says like 100 blessings a day. That's why we have the motzi, right? Which on the surface is a ridiculous blessing. It thanks God for bringing forth bread from the earth, which, by the way, isn't how it works, right? Bread doesn't come forth from the earth. And it's a blessing for a slice of bread, right? Such a simple thing that would be easy to overlook. Most of the blessings we have are not over, the parting of the sea or some miraculous thing. They're over the most ordinary and seemingly mundane things, the things that it would be so easy to miss, right? So to me, so much of Judaism is about not letting the ordinary moments slip by. And I think so often, perhaps, we do encounter the divine, that which is greater than we, in the moments and in the times and in the places when, frankly, we least expect to. And I think that's what Jacob is sort of speaking to. Like, here I was, traipsing through the desert, camping for the night, taking a nap. And when I least expected it, I had this epiphany. I had this moment. And I think, again, what's the sermon in it? In my opinion, it's for us to look for those moments, right? To be open to those moments in the places when we least expect to. I'm going to keep going a little bit in this overarching narrative arc of the Torah portion, and then maybe we'll chat about it a little bit, and then we'll go to some text just to kind of give everybody a little bit of an architecture of it. And then the whole second piece of the Torah portion, I think, is also incredibly beautiful and instructive, because it kind of fast forwards through time, and it then has this moment when Jacob and Esau see each other again for the first time in, most likely, depending on how you do the math, decades, right? And Jacob is convinced, for a number of different reasons, that Esau still holds a grudge from the whole, again, birthright, blessing, deception, theft sort of debacle. So Jacob is convinced that Esau still holds a grudge, that Esau is actually coming to kill him with hundreds and hundreds of men. So Jacob actually splits up his family into two camps to protect them, and then goes out by himself to meet Esau. And there's, I actually think, a beautifully kind of dramatic scene that the Torah paints for us, in which, early in the morning, Jacob goes out, he sees Esau coming with hundreds of men, and he, goes out to meet Esau, and he, in essence, approaches him and kneels, preparing for some kind of retribution. And Esau, simply put, gives him a hug, gives him a kiss, and then they weep together. in this sort of, I think, beautiful moment of forgiveness and reconciliation that, I think I don't have a sibling. I'm an only child, but I think many of us with siblings, it's not always easy. It's not always simple. But, in essence, to me, it's like, okay, whatever happened when we were kids was when we were kids, and we're a lot older now, and we're grownups and we have families, and, they spent however many years, decades, sort of estranged from each other. And here is Esau saying that's over. Here's a hug and a kiss, and we'll cry together and move on together. Which I think is also an incredibly instructive lesson about forgiveness, frankly, because Jacob certainly did not see that coming. But Esau chose to forgive and kind of take the higher road. So all that, I'm kind of curious before we get into text, thoughts, reactions, offenses. I see a thumbs up from Courtney. I don't know if that's a hand. Yeah, no, you just hit a thing that you did. Okay. Let me see. I see a few things in the chat. You can put in the chat too if you don't want. Douglas. Yes, I will repeat the sentence. The sanctification of the mundane, turning the mundane into, that which is sacred, right? If you right, there's the final blessing, the fourth and final blessing that we say when we make Havdalah on Saturday night, marking the end of Shabbat, is Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol, the blessing over the separation between literally the sacred and the mundane, right? Between the sacredness of Shabbat and the quotidian of the rest of the week. And I think that, without getting into a whole sermon about it, certainly a few of the folks here, Kimberly and Courtney and Roy and others, have, heard me say many times, in my opinion, that is not the only reason, but one of the values, at least for the rabbis, behind kashrut, is how do we take what could be a very simple and mundane act, which is eating because it's a necessity, and elevate it, transform it into something more by putting some thought and mindfulness into it, and not just, the idea that a meal should be different than pulling up at Chevron to fill your car with gas, right? And by, putting thought into what we buy, what we cook, how we cook it, how we serve it, and oh, by the way, a few blessings if one chooses, elevates that experience. By the way, not a monopoly for Jews, right? Folks of other religious traditions who say grace before a meal, that's the same thing. It's taking a moment to pause and say, like, this is meaningful. This is special. This is right. And that's what, think about every Jewish ritual. Think about a baby naming. Think about a bar mitzvah. It's about carving out that time and saying this and elevating that moment, right? Think about a wedding. Think about a funeral, right? It's about elevating that experience in that moment in time into something more. Okay, we'll get into a little text and then we'll keep talking. I'm going to share my screen. And I picked a couple of texts that I think, here we go, that I think focus on a few ideas. Right, one is, well, we'll read and then get into it. Anybody want to volunteer to read? I will if nobody wants to, but.
I would, Rabbi.
All right, go for it, Donna.
Okay. The same night he arose, and taking his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, he crossed the ford of Jabbok. After taking them across the stream, he sent all of his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at his socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the others, "What is your name?" Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob, Yaakov." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Yaakov, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human, and have prevailed. Jacob answered, "Pray tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave, and he took leave of him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved.
Beautiful. Thank you, Donna. So, right, this is kind of set the scene. The other piece, which I neglected to mention earlier, right, is that in this wrestling, Jacob's name is changed from Jacob to Israel, for the reasons that the text shows us. And again, many have heard me say this before, that, right, the name Israel literally means one who wrestles with God. And I certainly believe that is far greater and more expansive than, the physical wrestling that happened allegedly in this dream. That is wrestling with theology, right? That's, anybody that heard my Rosh Hashanah sermon this year, that one of the things that most of us don't think twice about, but that is actually pretty unique about Judaism, at least in the space of Western religious traditions, is, to use the fancy words, there's no theological dogma. I mean, we have the Shema, one God. I can't think of a single place or a single text anywhere in Judaism that prescribes what one must believe about that oneness, which creates the space, as many of us know, for literally dozens, if not more, Jewish theologies, which leads, in my own estimation, to two things. It leads to a bunch of Jews, probably some of us on this Zoom, who say that they're cultural Jews or secular Jews or Jews that just like bagels and lox and astronomy or whatever, right? I don't really know what a secular or cultural Jew means. Like, it is a religious tradition. I know what people mean when they say that. They mean they like being Jewish and it's meaningful to them, but they have God issues, but yet have no problem, identifying as Jewish. And I think that's in part because there's no prescription about a certain belief, right? Because Judaism, for better or worse, privileges behavior over belief. But yeah, I've never met somebody who calls themselves a secular Catholic or a cultural Christian, right?
For real.
Right?
For real.
So I think the expanse of space for what might or might not make sense to any individual when it comes to theology is unique, and I would say comes from this notion, right, that Jacob wrestles with God, and that so people come to me and they say, "Oh, Rabbi, I'm not sure about God or this or whatever, and I'm a bad Jew." I'm a bad Jew. On the contrary, one, I don't think there's a such thing as a bad Jew, but two, you're struggling and wrestling with what you do believe, what you don't believe, what might make sense, what might not make sense. On the contrary, that makes you, I would say, a great Jew, because it's literally in our name, right? We're the people Israel after Jacob in this week's Torah portion. It baked into who we are and baked into our DNA is this idea that we're meant to wrestle with God. One last anecdote, which again, others people have heard me tell, but I can't resist because it's one of my favorites. A good friend of mine named Ryan Bell, I have to say used to be a Seventh-day Adventist pastor at a church in Hollywood. Seventh-day Adventist, for those who aren't familiar, pretty small and pretty conservative sect of Christianity. Ryan grew up in that world, and he became a pastor. Super socially liberal. I met him community organizing for homeless rights and issues. And I don't know, 6-7 years ago, something like this. He started to just sort of wonder if maybe the one way that he had thought about God his entire life, maybe there was another way to think about God. Nothing radical, right? But just maybe there was another way to think about things. And this little intellectual kind of experiment in his head resulted pretty quickly in him losing his job as a pastor at his church. He was on the faculty at a couple of seminaries, conservative seminaries. Also, that went away. His family, his wife left him and kids, and that did not go well either. And he and I ended up at breakfast, kind of at the beginning in January of what he then decided to call a year without God, as he was sort of on this journey, and he had a blog, and don't worry about him. It turned out fine. He ended up as a pundit on CNN, and he's in politics now. But we had breakfast at John O'Groats. And for those who can picture it, on the awning outside, it says Heavenly Biscuits. And he thought that was hilarious as he walked in. And Ryan's telling me about this whole journey as I just kind of shared it with you. And he's a super smart guy, knows a lot about Judaism. And I just looked at him and I said, dude, it's so Jewish, right? Like your whole kind of intellectual pursuit about, I don't know, maybe God is this, maybe God is that. I don't know. I'm unsure. I'm kind of wrestling with it. I said, it's so Jewish. He said, I know. And I said, look, my heart goes out to you. I said, because you had to leave your entire world to have this conversation with yourself. And it is literally Tuesday for a Jew, right? It's the beginning of a conversation that, some know because you've been through it with me. I have with every single bar and bat mitzvah family in preparation for the B'nai Mitzvah. It's a conversation we have with, everyone who's learning more about Judaism, maybe wants to become Jewish. It's, an accepted conversation at shul. And in my limited knowledge, most other places and most other traditions, it's considered heresy, right? And that really does. I mean, it comes from this Torah portion, I think. Comes from, baked into the DNA of the Jewish people. We're, Yisrael, the people who wrestle with God. It comes from this dream. So the question, I think, that comes, though, and I alluded to it earlier, from this little vignette is, okay, so who is Jacob wrestling with? Because he doesn't really say, right? Jacob asks who, but he doesn't really get an answer. So we're going to kind of look I'm going to skip these first texts. Okay. Right. Who is Jacob wrestling with? So a few different ideas. So anyone want to read this first text, Rashi?
Well, I will.
Go ahead.
Okay. Our rabbis of blessed memory explained that he was Esau's guardian angel. Another one says an angel engaged him in physical fight, his purpose being to prevent Jacob from fleeing. Only in this way could God's promise to Jacob that Esau would not harm him be fulfilled.
Okay, let's pause right there, Susan. Thank you. Right. So Rashi and Rambam, two of the greatest, biblical commentators of all time, right? Both connecting this experience to the whole Jacob Esau conflict and dynamic, right? Rashi suggesting that that Jacob is actually wrestling with Esau's guardian angel, and Rashbam, interestingly, draws this connection that this whole episode is actually trying to slow Jacob down, to actually prevent his journey so that he doesn't end up, rendezvousing with Esau and potentially, being harmed. Thoughts, reactions? Let me scroll through here. Sorry, I don't have everybody on my screen right now.
I like these.
Yeah? What do you like about it, Susan?
I think the one with what you just said, to slow him down.
Yeah.
He injures the thigh bone, that connection with the joint. And the other thing from fleeing, as he did once before, 20 years ago, when he stole the birthright and fled from his brothers. So I like these two. There are also, it's interesting, then Sforno, the next one, in order to symbolize Jacob's triumph over Esau. I'm not sure how this is a triumph in this wrestling.
So, right. So I think the connection Sforno is trying to make there, right? So you push us on to the next text, which is fine, right? Is trying to draw this. Look, I think problematically, and I sort of touched on this in a in a thing I did, I think, for Taste of Shabbat a couple of weeks ago. The rabbis, I think problematically so, sort of kind of think it's totally fine, what happens between Jacob and Esau, and that, their mother is a willing accomplice, and that they deceive Isaac, and Jacob gets Esau's blessing. And so that's, I think, the first incident of Jacob prevailing over Esau that's being alluded to, right? That he theoretically wins the day. He's got to run away, but he comes away with the blessing, right? And then here, this idea that, well, right, his name gets changed to Israel, we're told, by whoever he's wrestling, because he wrestled and prevailed, right? So it's I think it's drawing that connection that, once again, here's Jacob, prevailing. I think certainly the former, again, personally, I think I think it's wrought with conflict to paint that whole dynamic as anything other than incredibly dysfunctional, right? I mean, 2 parents, 2 kids, they each play favorites. It was Taste of Shabbat, because I remember Cantor Gurney and I talking about it, right? That and him talking about, even as a kid, it being a deeply disturbing story to him, with a brother, right? That, like I said, I'm an only child, but I look at my kids and I think I would never, want such a dynamic, not to mention that dynamic in a way encouraged by their parents.
Yes.
I mean, that's the part that, when you really think about it, is a little, mashugana, as they would say, like, that their parents are each playing favorites and kind of encouraging this. And and as I shared, for those who heard it, I shared in that Shabbat message, I think the amazing teaching that I came across just this year for the first time. I see your hand down, I'll get you in a second. The amazing teaching from the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi of the UK, was this idea that if you actually go back, it's not this week's Torah portion, but if we go back, 2 weeks, and look at the Torah portion, there's actually not only one blessing, there's 2. And I never had noticed that before, but there's actually 2 blessings. And what's interesting, what Rabbi Sachs teaches, is this idea that, so that when Jacob is impersonating Esau, the blessing that he receives, the blessing that Isaac gives Jacob, but thinking he's Esau, is a blessing about wealth, material possessions, and power, right? Will you inherit my lot? You'll inherit my lives. You'll get the livestock, and people will revere you. That's a lovely blessing. That is not the, ancestral blessing, the covenantal blessing that, God gives to Abraham and later Isaac, right? That blessing is about, land and being fruitful and people and generations. And interestingly, that blessing is the second blessing that Isaac actually does give to Jacob when Jacob is about to flee. And what Rabbi Sachs suggests, which I agree with and had never thought about before, is twofold. One, the whole idea that, like, there's only one blessing and there's not enough to go around, I think is, foolish. So clearly there's enough to go around. But one, that Isaac knows both of his boys, and he gives each of them the blessing that makes sense for them, right? Okay, maybe he favored Esau, and he gives Esau the blessing because he knows what matters to Esau, which is, livestock and power. But he also knows that Jacob is going to be the ancestral heir to the Jewish people, and he gives Jacob that blessing. And that the sad part, again, in Rabbi Sachs's kind of estimation of it, is that, so the whole deception was for naught, right? Because Jacob was going to get the blessing that he was meant to get anyway. He didn't need to grab the other one. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. I see a bunch of hands. Let's go Susan and then Brad and then Claudia.
So what did some interpretation, in this case, the angel might be Jacob's moral quandary, his own.
Yes, right. Yes, a whole teaching that maybe, right? I mean, I'm trying to remember. Oh, an odd example. An oldie but a goodie of the movie Fight Club with Ed Norton and Brad Pitt, right? And right at the end of the movie, right? If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, I'm about to give it away, right?
Okay.
Brad Pitt's character doesn't exist. Ed Norton is, there's this scene where Ed Norton is actually in an alley fighting himself. He's not fighting another person. He's punching himself in the face. He's beating himself up. There's many, Susan, yeah, to your point, who suggest that that's what this is, that it is Jacob wrestling with himself and his own inner demons. By the way, I think there's also a tremendous amount of value in that. But absolutely, that whole kind of balance of, is it something external or internal or, what have you? Brad.
Well, Susan, you said, you took the words out of my mouth. But the one thing I might add is that if he's fighting with himself and then he has a name change, that's maybe an expression of him taking agency over his own life, him renaming himself, so to speak. And this is somebody whose life has largely been directed by others. I mean, a basic choice that his mother made for him. So this is a way of him assuming his agency, as an individual. And maybe that's a 20th century perspective on this, but.
No, I think Brad, I think you're 100% right. 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 If you look at basically just in this Torah portion, if we look at the very beginning and the very end, he starts as like I sound like my grandmother. He starts as a pisher on the run, right? Because he's afraid of his brother's retribution. And at the end of it, he is the sort of inheritor of, the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, and walks away with his brother's forgiveness, poised to be a great leader. And that's definitely a transformation, and 100%, certainly in Judaism, right? If we think about Abraham, right, whose name changes from Abram to Abraham's, right? When he makes his deal with God, a name change is a big deal, and a way to signify that kind of transformation and change. I think that's spot on. Claudia.
I have a question about the logic of Rashi's explanation.
Yeah.
To take it a little further and try to understand where it's coming from. So if he was fighting with Esau's guardian angel, does that imply that by sort of winning him over, getting a blessing, is forgiven? Or is Rashi trying to justify Jacob's behavior to begin with?
That's a great question. I have no idea what Rashi's trying to do, but I'll give you my own thought about it. I think I think it's the former, and I think it may potentially, right, is then in a way foreshadowing Esau's unexpected forgiveness of Jacob, later in the Torah portion. I'm not sure, although potentially, how much of it is about trying to legitimize his past actions. But again, as I said before, and I think it's very problematic, there's very little criticism of Jacob, much less Rebecca, in the tradition, for, flat out deception, right? Right. I mean, she encourages him. She, dresses him up as Esau. She cooks the meal. I mean, the whole thing is a little fraught. Let me see quickly here. Brad, is that the same hand or another hand?
That's the same hand. Okay. But you know, the idea of a trickster was very common in ancient literature. I mean, think of Ulysses. Ulysses is the ultimate trickster. Tricksters are frequently heroes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, Ulysses is a great example, right? When you think about Polyphemus, right? The
Exactly.
Cyclops, right? And not to mention the sirens, and I mean all of it. Yeah. Okay, let's push on to another text. Somebody want to read? Brad, you got you right there. We want to read?
What am I reading here? Radak?
No, above.
Okay. A man began to wrestle with him. The man was an angel who would assume the form of a human being. The angel, Esau's protective power, had come to prevent Jacob from escaping from Esau. He realized soon that God's assurances to Jacob were strong enough to protect him against being harmed by Esau.
Right, so that references the Rashbam's comment, right? That this is about, as Susan said, sort of delaying Jacob from meeting Esau and then presumably some harm, but also in a way is counteracting the other commentary, right? About counteracting this notion of Jacob, of the angel being there to actually ultimately protect Jacob from Esau, because here we're hearing that no, this is about actually keeping Jacob on the path, on the journey, and not letting him get away. Brad, I saw your hand go back up. I think I saw somebody else's too. No? Oh, never mind. Courtney.
I just wonder, if you're just trying to stall him, why fight him? Why not do something? It's just an interesting choice, if we're gonna, put symbolism and that sort of thing together with it, that they didn't bring him a tray of fruit or something and sit down, have a nice meal, a glass of wine.
Yeah, I think there's the idea of, the physical harm in a way, right? Makes it, hip socket. I don't know. I've never walked on a pulled or strained or broken hip or whatever, but I'm sure it's not fun. But I agree, right? There are countless other things that could have happened, right? To divert him, right? Think about the story of Balak, right? And Balaam, right? Kind of the story of Shrek in the Torah, right? With the talking donkey and all. And here goes, Balaam, this sorcerer, to go and curse the Jewish people. And what happens? There's an angel in God who keeps sending the donkey off course, right? The donkey keeps wandering off the trail. So clearly lots of other ways to try to divert and stop something from happening. So yeah, why this? That's a great point. I saw a hand. Look here. Forgive me, I'm just scrolling through. Oh, there we go. Warren, Phyllis.
So I really like what Brad said. I really like the idea of Jacob struggling with his demons, his own demons, and what has happened in his life up till now, and how he's going to move forward. And the fact that God doesn't appear from this point on in all his maneuvering to meet Esau. It's not that he's being guided. There's nothing that says he's being guided by God. He's making his own decisions about how to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think the element of agency is absolutely present there. And I think actually it's a wonderful setup for the Radak thought commentary, if anybody wants to read that.
I just have some comment too.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Courtney brought up something. She referred to the symbolism. And this is an ancillary thing, but in art, this is a key painting by Gauguin in the symbolist movement, Jacob wrestling with the angel. And I have an image of it here, but I don't know how it's going to show up on your screen. But it was after Gauguin lived with a very religious group in Brittany, and it was after a sermon by the pastor there on this particular theme that he painted this key image, 1888, which is in Scotland now, Jacob wrestling with the angel, and it's moving into abstraction. It's not meant to be realistic against a red background, and I think that we might think of these as all of these stories, which we are doing now too, as metaphorical or symbolic. Obviously, we don't know the literality of the angel, but I just wanted to jump on that. This is also an important theme in Christianity as well.
Well, I think the idea also of there being metaphor, right? Not to be self-serving, but I think connects to, the thought I shared earlier about theology and not physically necessarily wrestling with God, but what does that mean in a larger kind of metaphorical sense? Absolutely. Can I convince somebody to read this Red Doc commentary?
Yeah, I'll read it. How do you pronounce this? This is Ish.
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 Which, sorry, it's not translated here. Ish in Hebrew is man.
Oh, okay. Ish, the same type of Ish as in Joshua 5:13, i.e. an angel. This was the angel Gabriel, described as Ish par excellence in Daniel 9. The reason why these angels are called Ish is because they appear to the people with whom they converse in human guise. The types of angels who speak with men are referred to as Ish, as they appear either in a vision or while the person to whom they appear is fully awake. God has sent this angel to Jacob to strengthen his courage, not to fear Esau. If Jacob could prevail over an angel, surely he had no reason to be afraid of an encounter with someone like Esau. The fact that the struggle lasted until daybreak was an allusion to Jacob, that after a period of night, i.e. problems, adversity, there would come a period of light, peace and prosperity, coupled with security.
It's lovely.
It's lovely. When this Radak person I'm not familiar with, when did he live?
It's a great question, and I'm hesitating because I don't want to misspeak.
Because this is a very modern interpretation, like this.
It is not. Yeah, no, it is not modern.
I'm sure it's not, but it's it feels like
12th century.
12th
and early 13th century. So I mean, modern in a way in a Jewish context, but not really. I mean, not sort of a little later, but in the Rashi, Rashbam sort of era.
Yeah.
I think the piece also that is interesting to me here is not to argue with Radak, but Jacob does prevail over the angel. He's still terrified of his encounter with Esau. It does not strengthen him in terms of courage to go face his brother. He's terrified that he's positive that Esau still holds a grudge, that Esau is going to kill him. That's why he separates his family and he goes and sort of begs for mercy. However, the piece that I think, were I giving a sermon on this, I would really focus on, is the last sentence, really, right? About the fact that the struggle lasts all the way until daybreak. And this idea that I'm sure all of us have experienced this, right? Everything, I'll say it in the positive. Nothing is as anxiety provoking or terrifying or scary, when the sun comes up. It's at 2:00 in the morning that it's terrifying, right? I seem to be quoting Steve a lot today, but I remember Rabbi Leader many years ago, I heard him say, and I think it's a leaderism, that the sun always rises no matter how dark the night, right? Yeah, Susan, I'm sure you've heard it many times, right? The sun always rises no matter how dark the night. And I think it's true. And I think that's a a good perspective, right? There's an old story that many of us probably know, right, about this king who was going to expel the Jews. And I mean, there's like a million stories about the king that was going to expel the Jews and gives them an impossible task, right? So in this particular version of the story, the impossible task is to bring him something that will make him happy when he's sad and sad when he's happy. And, you know, Yankel or whoever goes out searching the land for this and can't find it. And it's the last moment before the deadline. And he's coming back to the palace, and all, you know, everybody in Helm or wherever the story takes place is going to get exiled because Yankel couldn't find a gift. And he stumbles into a jewelry shop, you know, a block from the palace, and shares his task with the jeweler. He says, "Oh yeah, I've got the perfect thing for you." And he reaches into this drawer, he pulls out a ring, and on the ring he etches the phrase "Gam ze ya'avor," which in Hebrew, in essence, means "this too shall pass." Right? And he takes it to the king, and it works, right? Because this idea that whatever it is, and in the case of Radak's comment, you know, on the negative side, it not forever. You know, it does temper. And also the flip side, we're rolling into Thanksgiving next week. You know, gratitude and appreciation for the beautiful pieces, because you know, they also don't necessarily last forever either. But so I think there's, again, as I said, if I were giving the sermon on this, I think that's a beautiful spot. I'm going to push us on a little bit. We've got one more text, perfect timing. So this is Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed. I will just go ahead and read it for the sake of time. And he says, "This is the case when it is said in reference to Jacob, and a man wrestled with him. This took place in a prophetic vision, since it is expressly stated in the end that it was an angel. The circumstances are here exactly the same as those in the vision of Abraham, where the general statement, and Adonai appeared to him, etc., is followed by a detailed description. The wrestling and speaking was entirely a prophetic vision." So this sort of, I think, alludes back to the idea that he was alone. Right? He was alone. This was all maybe internal. Brad, was that you I just heard?
Yeah, but interestingly enough, it is not presented as a dream, even though it's a nighttime event.
Yeah.
It is not presented as Jacob's ladder, for example, as
True.
a dream.
Right.
So the idea that this is a prophetic vision is
bridge too far.
I'm not sure I see the vision aspect in the way that this is presented here, because it could have been presented as a dream.
Absolutely.
But it's not. And in fact, you know, it would almost be, it almost seems like it would work better were it to be a dream.
Agreed. And I think, look, and this is doing what I always caution and advise everyone not to do, which is sort of looking at an ancient text through a contemporary lens, right? But I would argue that, you know, the point I made earlier about the angels going up and down and all of us having the potential to be angels in that sense aside, in the more traditional sort of sense of angel, you know, in a 21st century sense, I would say that the only place we're encountering those kind of angels maybe are in our own minds, in our own internal experiences, not, you know, in the middle of the desert in a wrestling match necessarily. But I think it does raise an interesting point, right? Particularly, I think it would be an interesting point either way, but particularly because the dream frame is there, right? It's already set up in the story. And yet this is not a part of that. Right? I think it would be, even if the dream frame wasn't there, I think it would be interesting, but I think it's all the more so given that that kind of theme has already been introduced there. So I, you know, from my perspective, I think there are many. but I think if nothing else, the takeaway from this story and from this story and from Jacob really is this idea of, I'll use a slightly more maybe positive word than wrestling. This idea of engagement, and I guess wrestling is not a negative word. And wrestling with, I said theology earlier, but also as we're doing right now with text and with what it means, right? I mean, that's why, on the surface, you could look at Jews and think, what the hell is wrong with these people? They're reading the same stories the same week, every single year, over and over and over again. Like, haven't you already read the book a few times, right? And yet, part of the reason, right? Right. There's an old phrase, right? Turn it, because everything's in it. Because every year we come to it differently, and every year we wrestle with it and have new meanings, right? Because we see it, I think, I think we see the text often less in its own light and more in our light, right? Sort of, we bring to it our own experiences and what we are, and wrestling with it and struggling with it and figuring out what it means to us in any given moment in time and in history. I mean, that's, again, to Jacob's name being Israel and all of us being the people of Israel. I mean, it's, simply put, I think just baked into our DNA. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I won't see everybody next week, I don't think, but have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.